911.
Oh, I'm trying to kill me.
911, how can I help you?
I'm trying to kill me.
What happened?
I'm moving from Facebook.
911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm and professional, but what followed was far from ordinary. A frantic voice broke through the line, a woman, gasping for breath, her words trembling with fear. Help me. I think I'm going to die. This wasn't just any distress call. It was the final plea of a woman trapped in unimaginable terror. Little did anyone know, this call would become the first puzzle piece in a case that would horrify the nation and leave even the most seasoned detectives searching for answers. Annie Hester was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel at ease. She was deeply connected to her family, a devoted mother who cherished every moment with her children. Her love for gaming provided her a way to unwind after busy days, allowing her to bond with friends online while balancing her responsibilities at home. Annie's life wasn't perfect, but she found joy in the simple things: a quiet evening, a shared laugh, or a heartfelt conversation with her loved ones. But on one unthinkable night, the peace of her world was shattered. It began with a desperate 911 call, her voice filled with panic and fear. Annie had been attacked in her own home, a place where she should have been safest. By the time police arrived, the scene was already grim. Evidence pointed to a brutal assault, and despite their immediate efforts, it was too late to save her. Annie was rushed to the hospital, fighting for her life, but the injuries she had suffered proved too severe. The horror of that night left her family and community in shock. Questions surrounded the case, and the search for answers would lead to discoveries far darker than anyone could have imagined. Annie's life, once filled with love and light, had come to a tragic and violent end. The scene inside Annie Hester's home was nothing short of horrifying. When investigators arrived, they immediately noticed the door had been left unlocked, a detail that raised questions about how the attacker entered. Nearby, a shattered window suggested a forced entry, and the disarray inside pointed to a struggle that had turned violent. Furniture was overturned, objects lay scattered across the floor, and the atmosphere told the story of a desperate fight for survival. In the center of the chaos, the trail of evidence grew more disturbing. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, even in the hallway. Forensic experts carefully examined the patterns of blood splatter, piecing together the violent events of that night. Annie had been stabbed more than 60 times, each wound a harrowing testament to the brutality she had endured. But it was the markings on her body that left investigators speechless. On her shoulder, the letters VXV had been carved, a detail that seemed to hold some twisted meaning, though its purpose was unclear. Neighbors later recalled strange noises that echoed through the quiet night. They described hearing thuds and muffled cries, but it wasn't until Annie's frantic 911 call that the gravity of the situation became clear. Her voice, trembling with fear and pain, revealed that she had been attacked. Her words led officers to the scene, but by the time they arrived, the damage had already been done. Every detail of the crime scene painted a picture of relentless violence and suffering. It was clear this was no random act, but something deeply personal. For investigators, the clues left behind held the answers they needed, but the journey to uncover the truth was only just beginning. Annie Hester's life was one filled with both joy and challenges. She had married Matt Hester, and together they shared a daughter, Alice, who quickly became the center of Annie's world. For a time, their family life seemed stable, but cracks began to form when Matt's infidelity came to light. The betrayal shattered their marriage, and eventually, the two parted ways. As a single mother, Annie faced struggles, but her determination to provide Alice with a happy and stable life never wavered. She balanced work, parenting, and her personal hobbies with grace, always ensuring Alice came first. Despite the pain of their divorce, Annie and Matt worked hard to maintain an amicable co-parenting relationship. Matt's remarriage to Angela could have strained the dynamic further, but Annie chose to focus on keeping things peaceful for Alice's sake. Friends and family described Annie as someone who gave her all to those she loved. Her dedication to Alice, in particular, was evident in everything she did. While life wasn't always easy, Annie's resilience shone through, allowing her to face challenges with strength. Behind the scenes, however, Annie's story carried an undercurrent of unresolved tensions, though few could have imagined the events that would later unfold. Her life, full of both warmth and hardships, took a tragic turn no one saw coming. The investigation into Annie Hester's murder started with urgency, but detectives quickly realized they were facing a challenging case. The first people questioned were Matt, Annie's ex-husband, and his new wife, Angela. Since Matt still shared custody of Alice with Annie, his connection to her life made him a person of interest. However, it wasn't just their relationship that drew attention. Matt's demeanor during questioning raised eyebrows.
Didn't say how or anything. We'll talk about it.
Officers noticed Matt showed little emotion as he discussed Annie's death, which stood out as unusual given the circumstances. While grief can manifest differently in people, his calmness felt out of place. Angela, on the other hand, struggled to maintain consistency in her statements. Her version of events often shifted, leaving detectives questioning whether she was hiding something or simply overwhelmed by the pressure of the interrogation. As the investigation unfolded, detectives encountered a frustrating lack of physical evidence. The crime scene, though horrific, offered few leads. No fingerprints or obvious clues tied anyone directly to the attack. Even with advancements in forensic science, the case proved difficult to piece together. The only potential clue lay in Annie's 911 call, but the assailant's identity remained unknown. Detectives worked tirelessly, retracing Annie's final days and analyzing her connections. They faced mounting pressure to solve the case, especially as Annie's loved ones demanded answers. With limited evidence, law enforcement had to rely heavily on interviews, behavioral analysis, and any inconsistencies they could uncover in the stories provided by those closest to Annie. The early stages of the investigation painted a picture of a case full of dead ends. Yet, amidst the challenges, the authorities remained determined to find the truth. Annie's life had been taken in an act of unimaginable violence, and her family deserved justice. As the investigation continued, the detectives began to piece together potential motives behind Annie's brutal murder, with Matt and Angela both becoming prime suspects. 3 key motives stood out as central to understanding the case: custody of Alice, jealousy, and financial strain. First, there was the matter of Alice's custody. Matt and Annie had shared custody of their daughter after their divorce, but as Matt remarried Angela, the dynamics between the two ex-spouses became increasingly tense. The custody arrangement was an ongoing source of conflict, and it was clear that both Matt and Angela wanted full control over Alice's future. With Annie dead, the custody of Alice would no longer be an issue, and the couple would have more power over the child's life. This made Matt a natural suspect, and the possibility that Angela might have been involved to remove Annie from the equation became more apparent. Next, there was the growing jealousy between Angela and Annie. Angela's bitterness towards Annie was no secret. She had always resented the fact that Matt was still so closely connected to his ex-wife, especially given their shared responsibility for Alice. This jealousy escalated over time, and detectives suspected that it could have played a role in her involvement. Angela's obsession with Annie's life and her strained relationship with both Annie and Matt suggested that there might have been deeper emotions driving her actions. Finally, there was the financial burden. Matt and Angela were under significant financial strain, and with the murder of Annie, their problems could potentially disappear. The motive here wasn't just about money, but the possibility of avoiding debts and ensuring that Alice's future would be tied to Matt and Angela. Detectives suspected that financial pressure could have pushed them both to desperate measures. Further complicating matters, Angela had been fixated on Alice's mental health, going as far as attempting to diagnose her with bipolar disorder. She even made several unfounded reports to Child Protective Services, accusing Annie of neglect and unfit parenting. These actions showed Angela's determination to manipulate the situation, which cast even more suspicion on her. All of these factors, custody, jealousy, and financial issues, created a perfect storm of tension, fueling the growing suspicion around Matt and Angela. The relationship between them and Annie had been fraught with bitterness, and the investigation would need to uncover whether this tension had reached its breaking point. As the investigation progressed, a significant breakthrough came when surveillance footage and further questioning started to reveal inconsistencies in Matt and Angela's statements. Early on, Matt had claimed that he was physically incapable of committing the murder due to his disability. However, the evidence soon told a different story. Surveillance footage from a nearby store showed Matt moving with ease and performing physical tasks that contradicted his earlier claims. This raised red flags for investigators, casting doubt on his alibi and physical limitations. The detectives now had to consider the possibility that Matt had been more involved in the crime than he had initially admitted.
Everybody points to the ex-husband did it.
I want to help you guys.
I want.
Meanwhile, Angela's statements also began to raise suspicion. She had told investigators that she had been asleep the night of the murder, but the timeline was problematic. A neighbor who had been awake late into the night reported hearing noises from the direction of Matt and Angela's house around 3 a.m., just hours before Annie's 911 call. When Angela was confronted with this detail, her story began to shift. She had been adamant that she was asleep, but now it seemed that she may have been awake, or at least out of the house, during the time when Annie was attacked. The inconsistency in Angela's account made it clear that she wasn't being entirely truthful about her whereabouts. The final piece of the puzzle came from the neighbor's home security camera. It had captured some unusual activity at Matt and Angela's house the night of the murder. The footage revealed Matt's car leaving the driveway at an odd hour and returning later, in line with the time of the murder. Though the footage wasn't clear enough to provide conclusive evidence, it raised important questions. What was Matt doing during those hours? Why had he left at that particular time? The surveillance video seemed to confirm that Matt was not where he said he was, and that Angela might have been more involved than she had let on. These new revelations turned the case in a new direction. The evidence now suggested that both Matt and Angela had been less than forthcoming about the events surrounding Annie's death. The investigation was far from over, but the puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place. What had once seemed like an open-and-shut case was now a complex web of lies and deception. In 2019, Matthew Hester, Angela's husband, faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, and hindering prosecution. He maintained his innocence and requested legal representation during his hearing. By November 2020, Angela changed her plea, admitting guilt to second-degree murder. She avoided a trial and was sentenced to life in prison, though she will be eligible for parole after 25 years. In August 2021, Matthew Hester pleaded guilty to hindering prosecution and solicitation to commit murder, receiving a reduced sentence of 56 months as part of a plea deal. The prosecution, however, left the door open for future charges of conspiracy to commit murder if additional evidence comes to light. This tragic case underscores the long road to justice and the devastating impact of Anastasia's death on all involved. As we reflect on Annie's story, we are left with more questions than answers. The investigation continues to highlight the tragic complexities of her death. We encourage you to share your thoughts, your reflections, and your opinions in the comments. What do you think led to Annie's untimely death? How do you think Alice will cope with the loss of her mother? Please like, share, and engage with this story. Your voice matters. What do you think led to Annie's tragic death? Who do you believe was responsible for this crime? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like and share. Your opinion matters, and we want to hear from you.